So yeah, that was very powerful. It was very. I think you convinced me. I think you told me this stuff about the rebaptisms before, but I think what you did there was you convinced me. You brought the Henry Crete letter up. You brought up the thing with Albert. I realized, oh my gosh, they really did do this because I'd always sort of not. I'd sort of given them the benefit of the doubt. I couldn't quite compute that people would make other people question their salvation for the sake of stats. And I'm not trying to condemn anybody here. They were put under a lot of pressure, whatever. I'm not like, it's just more like, oh my gosh, you that whole that whole twice the son of hell thing, that whole, whitewashed tombs filled with dead
Hmm.
men's bones. I mean, it's amazing how far certain forms of religious or power structures, uh, I don't know. But anyway, I
Let
really,
me say this regarding Henry Crete.
yeah.
You know, I was his friend. We didn't know each other super well, but I've always had phenomenal respect for him. And I felt like the letter that he wrote and you sent were very significant in opening a lot of people's eyes. That's what I believe. He's not perfect, and he even made mistakes in the letter. And here's one. He said that he thought there'd been hundreds of people that had been rebaptized. I'm sorry, Henry. It's thousands. It's thousands. It's not hundreds. And that's all right if you didn't know that, but I'm saying it was that big of an issue. Thousands. And think about it, if it's not even doing the message to create the doubt, it's when someone comes that already has doubt. There's a lot of that. And instead of really being open minded and objective and giving them confidence, like I did that sister, when the mind starts going off, here's that number 7 that we were looking for this month. It's right here in front of me. That was going on too. People were rarely talked out of it. So,
And James, I just want to say, uh, for me, the real culprit is salvation theology. Like ultimately,
ooh, interesting,
that's the
interesting.
real. If I'm going to pin the blame on anything, it's this idea, because again, like I talk to ex-evangelicals, or I see their posts on Facebook. How many times did they pray Jesus into their hearts? How many times did they come forward and go, oh, this time I'm going to give my life to Jesus? It's a very similar thing because if there's a possibility, which
Right.
a lot of Christianity teaches, that, on the last day, Jesus is going to say, get away from me, I never knew you. If that is a constant possibility, of course you're going to be constantly insecure. I would say,
That's a good point. If we were believing everybody was going to heaven, there would have been no rebaptisms.
yeah, of course, like it doesn't, if everyone's going to heaven, baptism is just a nice thing to do, maybe as a sort of ceremony to mark a beginning of a new chapter in your life or to honor God or to honor whatever, you know.
It's almost like grace. It's almost like grace.
But the minute you have this idea that there's a possibility, I mean, the minute you have the idea that some people are going to hell and some people are going to heaven, for me, that immediately you've got the problem. The problem is that either like we're all going to hell and there's nothing we can do about it, or we're all going to heaven. Like, because the minute there's a possibility of some of us are going to heaven and some of us are going to hell, and the Bible makes well, certainly an interpretation of the Bible makes it incredibly hard because there's a constant thing of like, be careful, make every effort. Some of you will think you're getting there, but you're not really. So, there's a powerful delusion. And so it's not like the Bible
There's
goes,
a way
yeah,
that
don't
seems right to a man.
exactly. The heart is deceitful. There's all these things which I think have meaning to them. I mean, I think they have meaning to them, and that,
Yes.
but not once you bring eternal salvation, it just you're just creating deep paranoid insecurity. And that's one of the reasons why I believe any God of love, there's no way we're not all going to heaven. But that's for another time. Do you want to start your next lesson?
Well, I think I need to make at least a confession regarding my own. I don't think I preached to create doubt with people, but
Mm,
let me tell you what I did fall into.
okay.
We got a big event coming up here on Sunday. It's the big event. We got people coming from all over the country. We have that speaker coming in from another country. It'd be really great if we had a bunch of baptisms that day. So can we delay the people that are ready? This is the key. Why not delay some people that are ready? So I'm Mr. Urgency. I always preach baptism with urgency. I mean, my gosh. And now what are you waiting for? That's still in my brain. Get up, get baptized. What are you doing? What are you waiting for? But if someone wanted to get baptized on a Friday and the big service was on a Sunday, I would. Well, let's not rush into this. This is for a lifetime, this baptism. And I know we studied the conversion of Paul. I want us to look at again in the book of Acts and see exactly what he did 3 days before his baptism. He prayed and fasted for 3 days. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do. The rest of Friday, tomorrow, Saturday, on Sunday, and if you still feel like this is what you want to do, we will absolutely baptize you Sunday. Okay, that's a confession. That's a misuse of scriptures. This will really impress people. And we're going to have a lot of visitors at that service. They're going to see all these people baptized and go, what about me? But to use a scripture to say, pray and fast for 3 days so you'll be in alignment with what our goals are here, I'm sorry. I don't think God's pleased with that. So I wanted to confess that
I
that
appreciate you
that
sharing that.
that that was where I did fit into the manipulation of baptisms.
I appreciate you sharing that, James.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so here we are. This is a major category. I don't know how many segments we're going to have on this alone. Power is intoxicating. Power is intoxicating. I want to pause for a second. I'm going to ask you, but I'm going to ask anybody that's listening to this, whenever you're listening to it, who was your favorite preacher? I mean, within our group, like which speaker did you enjoy listening to the most? And I'm going to give you a second just to write down some names. You can write down more than one or two. But while they're doing that, Matthew, how about you give me an example of one or two of the speakers in our movement that you really enjoyed listening to?
I mean, Doug Arthur was my favorite. I mean, I only heard you, I think I've heard you twice. Definitely the Boomerang Bible. And everyone talked about you, by the way. When I first came, oh, you got to hear James. The first time I heard was Doug Jacoby. Then I heard Doug Arthur, and then I think I heard you. But I like Doug. Always was funny. I remember when my mum came to the church, I was like, "Oh, Doug, what do you think of Doug Arthur?" And it's funny because my mum liked Doug Arthur, but my mum also said there's definitely ego going on. That she didn't say it then, but at some point, my mum was like, when we were sort of debating stuff, she would say they definitely enjoy doing. They're enjoying being preachers. And she was pointing something out that I saw later that I think you're going to touch on to a degree. But Doug Arthur I liked. Funnily enough, somebody I've ended up having a bit of conflict with. I only heard Randy McKean preach once, but I really liked it. He was doing he'd lost all this weight, and he
He
was
could
doing
preach.
what's that?
He could preach.
Yeah, he was doing a sermon about losing all this weight and about self-discipline. I used to struggle with binging and my body and food and feeling fat, and so it really talked to me, and I really liked it. Uh, I mean, Kip, Kip. I was there in '88 when he preached, or his 18. They hated the dreamer, and I think did I like? Yeah, Kip's preaching was very intense.
Yep.
I think Doug Arthur was the one because he had the humor. I think Doug had genuine humor and a lot of self. He was quite self-effacing in his sermons.
He's also very bright
Yeah.
and I think appealed to a higher level of intelligence that people would appreciate, a little bit like yourself, by the way, with
Mm.
that same trait. So I'm asking people who are your favorite preachers, speakers. Let me tell you who mine was. His name, Richard Rogers. And guess what? He wasn't even in our movement. He was in the traditional Church of Christ in Texas. And from the first sermon I heard of his, it touched my heart. He had a southern accent. Maybe that was a little bit of it. But the way he preached, He had good humor as well. He made the scriptures come alive. He was a great storyteller. So Richard Rogers was my favorite. And Richard Rogers at the time was at the Sunset School of Preaching in Lubbock, Texas. And I called up, this is a cassette tape era. I said, how many sermons by Richard Rogers do you have? They said 500. I said, I'll take them all. Largest purchase. I think I was either engaged to be with Tanya then or we were boyfriend, girlfriend. But she said, why did you buy so many? I said, I want them all while they're still around. And I had one of those little compact cassette players that you just put it in, push the button, and I'd hold it up to my ear to listen to while I drove. So I'd be driving. Tanya would be sitting over here beside me, wanting to have a conversation. I'm listening to Richard Rogers right now. There's a sermon going on here. And she evidently talked to Kip or Lane about it because I got rebuked for when someone's in the vehicle with you, don't hold that thing up to your ear. But that's how much I loved Richard Rogers preaching. Oh, so I did my first sermon in Boston, and the next night I was getting my time with Kip. And I said, so what'd you think, Kip? What'd you think about my sermon? And he said, I think you sounded just like Richard Rogers. And I said, yes, yes, thanks. And he went, that was not a compliment. You know, though Kip never told us, and I need to say that he never told us, be really nice if you guys would just imitate me as a preacher. Like I'm the main guy. So if you could speak like me, say words like me, if you could just do a little bit more being like that compliments me and makes you sound. He never did do that with us. It amazes me how many people want to imitate him, especially in the ICC, by the way. Richard Rogers. I'll never forget a conversation I had with Richard Rogers years later. I actually went down to his home. I told Kip, I'm going away for the weekend. He said, where are you going? I said, Lubbock, Texas, get some time with Richard. Imagine what he thought about that. That's before I came to London. And I went and stayed with Richard. And that first night when I was at his house, I'll never forget this conversation. He looked at me and said, I've got to tell you some very important things. I said, go ahead. He said, being a preacher is intoxicating. I said, tell me more. He said, being a preacher is intoxicating for any of us. But James, being a preacher in the ICOC is extremely intoxicating. What do you mean? Well, you decide who is promoted and demoted. You decide if someone is ready to date. You decide who someone can marry. You decide where your members will live. And on it goes. Let me tell you something, James. When I speak to your group, I've never had an experience like it in any group. Christians come up and reserve the front rows before a sermon. I've never seen this. They come up and they put down their Bible right there on the front row. And then they go off to fellowship or other stuff, but they know that front row's saved. Do you know that's what people do in my church for the back rows? They come in and save the back row seats. They're more comfortable there. I couldn't believe it the first time I came to one of your churches. And I saw that. And everybody has a Bible. Everybody. I mean, when you mention a verse, you just listen. You just hear. You hear everybody thumbing through the pages. Most beautiful sound I can ever hear. Everyone's looking through their Bibles. And everybody has a Bible. Not just that. They're taking notes. The people in your group are taking notes when I'm preaching. Never seen a notepad come out before. Do you know what that does to a speaker? When I'm up here, and for the first time I'm seeing people fight for front rows, the singing is unbelievable. People are writing notes. And afterwards, they all come up to give me a hug. Do you know what happens in a traditional church? I meant to go stand at the front door of the church. So as they leave, they can shake my hand and say, nice job. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hope to see you again. Thank you. not your group. They're coming up and giving me hugs and telling me what they loved about the sermon. Now, James, I'm just going to tell you that kind of power is intoxicating. He was right. He was right. We treated our ministers with so much respect. It was like celebrity worship. And that's intoxicating. Very easy to lose your grounding when that's going on. I saw that power change many preachers. I saw it change me. Interesting confession here. My intoxication lasted for years after my exit. Here's proof. 10 years ago, I've been out of the church 30 years, by the way. 10 years ago, I called a college friend and I said, "What's on your mind today?" He said, "Man, I'll tell you what's on my mind, past taxes. And it's overwhelming. I hadn't done them for a number of years, and now it's kind of coming all on me. I've got to figure a way to get this done." And I responded, "Here's what you need to do. I'm glad you're talking to me because I've had some experience with this. Here's what you need to do. First of all, collect all of your receipts. Just collect them all. I don't care if they're in a suitcase. Get all the records from all your credit cards." And he went, "Whoa, whoa, 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 what are you doing? I didn't ask you for advice. You asked me what was I doing today. And I answered, working on past taxes. And you instantly started giving directions, advice to me about how to do this. But I didn't even ask." And I said, "Oh gosh, I'm still a leader in the church. I just assumed you wanted me to fix it. I just assumed that you wanted me to use the knowledge that God has given me to sort out people's problems and tell you how." Isn't that interesting? That after all those years, that was still somewhere in me. If someone has an issue, I can sort it out. Power is intoxicating. Here's one of the things I did read to you 6 months ago. The temptation of Jesus as found in Matthew 4, 8 through 10. Think about power being intoxicating, listening to this. "Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All of this I will give you," he said, "if you bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it's written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him. Angels came. Why that temptation for Jesus? Satan chose it. It's proven to be effective with leaders. One commentary on that scripture said, "The devil places us on high places by exalting with pride that he may dash us to the ground." Let me tell you a sad story. Most of the leaders that I knew and know have been dashed to the ground. It's true. Top leaders in our movement. I'm not going to mention names. Well, I might. Top leaders. By the way, if anyone says, if any of these guys say, "Why don't you give names?" I'll give names. I'm trying to be respectful in some regards. Top leaders have been fired. You don't know it. You never even heard about it. They were fired. They were kicked out. They were paid, but no title. Under the table. Another leader I know was paid to quit early. Elders called me and told me this. His elders called me and told me, "We wanted him out of here so bad, we said, don't wait for retirement. We'll give you extra money right now if you just leave." And he left. One crazy trait emerges from all of those. None of them can admit they were fired. They don't. It's one of the most bizarre things. They can't even see it. Satan knew. Look around, look at the splendor, look at all this land. We did it just that way. Kip would take a leader to the Eiffel Tower and say, all this will be yours. All of this prayer. We go to the top of the mountain. All this is yours in the future with your plans. And Satan found a way to dash those leaders to the ground again. Power is intoxicating. I'm just checking for time. Oh, we still got time. Do you want to interject anything here before I continue?
I just remember Kip always on those KNNs. They would climb the mountain, the Hollywood mountain, the Hollywood sign, or whatever country they were in. They'd go to some top. It was exactly true. I, I don't. Yeah, Satan is an interesting thing, but no, I think just carry on, Joe. Because you're doing great. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Powers and
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I did have questions about Richard Rogers and stuff like, did he ever become part of the movement?
No.
And did he was he later on did he get more kind of disapproving of the ICOC? Did he become one of the people who was critical of it?
Yes, but never so much that he was told to stop coming to speak. He was the favorite speaker at any conference we had. And it didn't matter if Kip and Chuck Lucas were speaking.
And I've got questions also about, but this is for another time. Just to remind Chuck Lucas and Doug Arthur and Doug studying with you. Did Chuck Lucas study with Doug? Who?
No, um, Steve Pipkin studied with Doug, who was the campus minister at the Coal Mill Church of Christ. He died years ago, but that was Doug's conversion.
But that thing
He
of
was,
doing a sin study with you, was that
yeah.
part of the Church of Christ then, even before, or was that a Chuck thing, or was that?
It wasn't a system of studies. It was just Doug knew that we needed to talk about I'm the only one saved in my family. He needed to do that. He needed to talk about repentance and what sins that I've been involved in. But
And
I
and
don't
had he
remember the
learned
church.
that? But had he learned that? Was that through Chuck, or was that just general
It
Church of
had to
Christ?
be more through Chuck. Yeah,
Right.
because Boston had not even started then.
But it wasn't Church of Christ practice. That was more Crossroads practice, was it?
Correct.
Okay. No, it's just
Correct.
that's so. Sorry, James. Carry on.
Typical Church of Christ practice is you can visit on a Sunday, hear a sermon, and say, I'm ready to get baptized. I believe
Okay.
Jesus. And you could.
Okay.
Power's intoxicating. I'm going to share about a few people. I'm not going to mention the names. I don't think it's important, but I had a staff of young people, men and women, couple married couples. I will mention that Steve and Joanne were one of the couples that were in the South with me. I still love them, keep up with them, obviously. One day we were having a meeting at Steve's house, and Joanne was the only woman in the leadership meeting. There may have been 8 of us in that room. And at one point, we had a young leader just become an evangelist. He just raised his hand and looked over at this woman who was not his wife. This was Steve's wife, and said, and this was in Steve's house. Hey, this meeting's going to probably go a little while longer. Joanne, why don't you get up and make a lunch for all of us? And you know what's interesting? I don't even recall it. I was talking to Joanne about this a year ago, and she was really disappointed that I didn't speak up and say, dude, hold on. That wouldn't even be so cool for you to say it that way if it was your wife in here, of which you have none, but that's his wife that you're saying. And here was the clincher that bothered me. She was more fruitful than any man in that room. Like, this woman needed to be in the meeting more than any of us. She was out baptizing a big chunk of all of us, even together. But when she brought it up, I realized that didn't even trigger something in my brain going, he's becoming a little bit too powerful in his mind to tell her to get up out of this meeting and go make us a lunch. things like that. Steve Johnson, by the way, you know how much I love this guy. I love Steve Johnson. He is one of my very close friends. Steve has told me that in New York, he thought that those guys on his staff, and that was a big staff, that was a massively successful church. He said, I thought these men would be my pallbearers at my funeral. Come to find out, they might not even attend my funeral. That's what he learned later. We thought we had these great relationships. We thought we had everybody just loving to get time. These brothers are happy to come over and take my trash out. You know why? Because they might brush up against me. That's why. These sisters are happy to come over and clean the house and make the food, because just being around spiritual people is worth it to serve. Come to find out, that's not how those people felt. That's what we're learning. And of course, I am going to mention this name, Doug Arthur, my closest friend, best friends in North Carolina, best friends in Boston, best friends in London. And it changed. And it changed the day that he came to me. We met out in a bar. And he said, I met with Kip. There's going to be a change. What? From now on, I'm in charge of London. I am, not us. What does that mean, Doug? It means that I'll be discipling you now. I don't know what I think about this, Doug. Well, you don't have to worry about it. You know why? You'll never notice. You'll never notice. In fact, I almost didn't tell you. He was never the same, nor was our friendship. And it did worsen with time. I told him about this. Told him twice in the last year these very words. Kip did you no favor when he appointed you world sector leader. No favor at all. All of a sudden, I had a sounding board. If I felt like something wasn't going right or someone's being mistreated, or I would talk to Doug, we'd try to get it resolved. We might bring in Doug Jacoby in to get his thoughts, his views. But on that day when he said, from now on, there's only going to be one leader over the churches, I'll be calling the shots. Kip did you no favor when he appointed you world sector leader. I knew Doug in 1978. He was fun. His heart was pure. He had an inkling of narcissism. Yes, he did. You know what? He was a very talented man. He was playing JV basketball for Duke. He's very bright, handsome man. And he was just a friend unlike friends I'd had. We never manipulated one another. We had no secrets from one another. And it changed. Sometimes I wonder, what would happen if it had been switched around? What if Kip would have told me, from now on, you're in charge. You tell Doug what to do. Would I be in the place where Doug is today? Would Doug be in the place right now doing this with you? I don't know. But I can tell you that 1-over-1 deal, 1-over-1, I think was the single biggest fault of our movement that led to the towers crumbling. Because as I just pointed out, we thought we had all these friends we were helping out. They weren't friends. They were made to be in that position underneath you. And if they didn't do everything you said, then they were proud. That 1-over-1 thing was a crash and burn. I saw Doug change over the years. But here's the deal, and I need to say this. Kip, he didn't change. He was always proud. He was always a narcissist from the very beginning. That's something I can say. I was there. I was hired. He told me 10 times I was his closest friend in the Boston church. Me. I know Kip McKean. He's always been proud. He was proud in Gainesville before he came to Boston. He was proud of Heritage Chapel. Ask the people that ever worked with him. He was a narcissist. By the way, we were 25 years old each. He acted like he was my grandfather talking to me. Spiritual sage. Hey, dude, we're both 25. Ease up a little bit on the what you've learned in your life. Kip was always that way. Let me tell you something that still hurts me to this day. Tanya, my wife, I met her, studied with her. She got baptized, led a Bible talk within 2 weeks, went over to London months later with me as a newlywed. And she was invited into her first Bible talk leaders meeting in Arlington downstairs after the Wednesday night service. Her first Bible talk leaders meeting. I sat by her. That night, Kip went around the room and said, okay, Bible talk leaders, how many visitors did you have this week? How many of them are close to baptisms? What are predictions for next week? Who's weak and struggling in your Bible talk? Those were the questions. And we were going around the room. Everybody was giving them, except for one lady who worked, I think it was Tufts. I could be mistaken. Tufts University. It may have been a different university. She was not a staff member. She was not an intern. She was a student trying to get an education, but was a Bible talk leader. And she said, Kip, I didn't have any visitors this week. I'm sorry. I tried. I went by. I followed up with them. But we didn't have visitors. He blasted her. Blasted her. No visitors. And you're going to sit in this meeting and you're listening to everybody around you. We had 5, 8 visitors, this, 10, and you're saying you had none? What happened all week? And I'm looking at her like, he's being too rough with her. She's not even a staff member. I was mostly worried about Tanya sitting beside me, listening to that. And it got worse. He said, before I'm letting you go, I need to tell you something. Some of you are new in leadership and you don't know the rules around here. When I finish preaching on a Sunday, you need to come up to me. And I don't care how long the line is. You need to stand in that line until you see me and tell me what you liked about my message, how it had an impact on you. And some of you are not doing that. And don't think I don't know who you are. I can tell you exactly who has not been standing in line to thank me. I remember hearing that and going, what is wrong with this guy? This is horrible. And as soon as the meeting was over, I met with Tanya. I said, Tanya, how'd you feel about the meeting? She said, well, I learned a lot. I said, yeah, I was kind of afraid of that. Can you tell me what you learned? She said, number one, I will never have 0 visitors to a Bible talk. I saw what happens. I hated hearing that from my girlfriend. My yoke is easy. Yeah, this is real easy here. You just joined something filled with love and joy and happiness, didn't you? So you got to make sure you never have a situation where there's no beer. What else did you learn? I didn't even know we were supposed to line up and tell him how good he is. I didn't even know. Well, that's something we learned today, honey. I thought about that later. Number one, that is selfish, that is a narcissist, and it's stupid. It's Sunday. We've got 150 visitors all throughout here talking about, I don't know if I'm going to buy this. This is pretty sad. Did you hear that stuff about this? The leaders, if at any time, should be out there meeting everybody who's visited, because Kip had them lining up on the side with no other concerns about Christians or fellowship or non-believers, lining up to tell them how good he was. Power is intoxicating. Dr. Jerry Jones said, one of my favorite quotes regarding our movement, what started out as the power of love later became the love of power. That was already happening in Boston long before I ever made a visit to London. And with that, our time is up.
So, James, I've got work because we're not going to record any more today. So, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm going to try and remember to bring this up the next time, but just those points about because there's so much stuff there about from an audio member's point of view about getting time with leaders and that and doing babysitting and I remember picking Pat Gemple up from the airport because I could get time with Pat Gemple and there's a there's a part of me that's like well there was I think if they had been super spiritual like it might have worked. I think the problem was when the revelation was they weren't super spiritual then that's that all I guess I was asking is let's be honest you weren't so and then there was some other stuff I might have to rewatch it before we meet next time and talk
Let
about
me throw this in. My good
yeah
buddy Steve Johnson,
yeah
after being in the ministry for all these years now in Portland with a smaller church, he goes to the airport to pick up everybody.
yeah
You were asked to go pick people up because they were a little bit too busy. You understand. You're not offended. These are leaders making big decisions for people's lives. You got nothing. You got time on your hands. You're not even a leader. Go pick her up. Maybe she'll brush off a little bit on you, and you'll be a little bit wiser. Okay, we all did that. But Steve Johnson goes to the airport for everybody, and he doesn't care the hour. Family member coming in at 1 a.m. I'll be there. Picks up, I want you to hear this, member that may have a family showing up that has never been to any church. I'll go do it. I'll take the van. We'll pick them all up. And always with a great attitude. So happy to serve. I got to tell you, I didn't see another minister do that, include myself, all those years. And now I have one example of an evangelist that will serve his church that way. How's he rewarded? Kick him out of the group. He's not in the Northwest churches. I
I
better
mean I
pause
could
on.
I'll share one last story before we go because this was even
Okay.
while I was in the church I won't say his name but there was an evangelist and I used to babysit his kids you
Yeah.
know and do stuff for him and but there was one time I needed some rent paid, and he lived just down the road from where I had to pay my rent, and I was at work. I couldn't get there, so I needed to get the cash to this place. And so it was a midweek meeting, and I said, "Can you do this? Can you pay the cash?" And he was like, "No, you shouldn't ask an evangelist because we're the busy." And I lost it. I've babysat your children. I mean, I've done. I can't remember what I've driven you, whatever. I can't.
I
But
never asked you for money.
yeah, I've never asked. Well, I've definitely never asked you for money. But like, you could just do this. You live literally down the road. It's like, and he did. To be fair to him, he didn't do it. He got his wife to do it. So he got his wife to do it.
So there it is.
But that
Hey,
was no. I just got to say that I understand. I understand the culture. Like we all understand that you know they were like we shouldn't be waiting at tables because we're I understand the justification for it. But I think we also need to let's look at what the reality was and let's look at where our hearts were and the damage it did and the true consequences of it. Anyway, there's so
well
much good
said.
stuff in
And
there.
we'll talk about that when we reconvene.